Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and let's go right now to a who's becoming a friend because she's been on our program before. She's a novelist and memorist, she says, but it is Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa. Nice to have you with us, Dahlma.
Oh, it's so nice to be invited back.
Well,
This is like home.
Well, that's a very good thing and a
Yeah,
very good sign.
yeah.
But what I really appreciate is the reason that you're here is because you have a book that's coming out just a couple of days away. We're pretty
Mhm.
excited about that. I was particularly, as I told you just before the show, particularly struck by the subject matter. But before we get to that, one of the things in your background is that you have a storytelling legacy, and that was inherited from when you came to the South Bronx and your relatives, as I
Mhm.
understand. Why don't you talk about that and how that informs your work as a writer and an author?
Sure. I first encountered storytelling. Well, my mother was a storyteller in terms of family. Um, we had moved from Puerto Rico, where I was born, to New York City, and she wanted to maintain the ties to the island and our relatives there and our culture. And so she would always tell stories. But I really became enamored of storytelling when I was sent to live with my grandparents in rural Puerto Rico. And the women would sit on my grandmother's porch and tell each other stories.
Wow.
Of course, they probably already knew those stories. They've been told 100 times, but they loved storytelling. And I was a child, so I couldn't enter the conversation. But I sat in the doorway and just listened and learned about
Mm.
story,
And
how to. Mhm,
you were wide-eyed and wide-eared. Um,
absolutely.
before we go to the next step, these were stories about things they knew or remembered, or they liked telling stories, like creating, fictional characters or
Right.
semi, things I remember. And as if my grandmother once, left home
Mhm.
and joined the circus and they created something, or were they really telling stories of whatever they had
They were
remembered?
telling stories about themselves,
Wow.
everybody in the community, stories they got from their parents and grandparents.
Mm,
Now, my grandmother was born near the turn of the century, of the near 1900s. So when she spoke about her grandmother, she was talking about a woman who lived in the 1800s. So for me, it was a brand new world,
right.
and
And,
I
and
was totally amazed.
And then, so that translated into you. Now, your first book was Daughters of the Stone. It was a finalist for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize. We talked about that the last time you were
Mhm.
here. And then this book is you telling a story, but you embellished it a little bit.
Okay, this is not a story based on
Let,
his.
First of
Okay,
all, the name of the book, and we want to show it.
okay.
We'll
The
show.
name of
Oh,
the book is
there
A
we go.
Woman of Endurance,
There you go.
and A Woman of Endurance is the English edition. There is a Spanish edition called Indomita, and it is about a woman who was purchased as a breeder, and she was brought to Puerto Rico from West Africa, and her owner used her really as a manufacturer of other um, enslaved people. And so every time she had a baby, it was taken
Incredible.
away and sold.
It is. I don't. I'm trying to find the words. It's just incredible. It's horrible. The thought of it, the abuse. I mean, how many things can you list?
Mhm.
Um, and so these things happened.
Yes.
And
And it happened, by the way, in Virginia, in Aruba, in different places.
did you hear about this specifically through some of the storytelling you had as a youngster, or was it just that style of interpreting real life and telling the story, something that you learned how to do?
Right. I knew about this type of use of African women from historical events.
Uh-huh.
This particular story is fiction. My it didn't come from a story told by anybody I heard of, but I put myself in the position of that woman and How would she live? How would she, more importantly, how did she heal? Because had a woman like this been put through that and not healed, I would not be here. Many of us would not be here. So how did she endure? How did she overcome that type of treatment?
Maybe you're asking it rhetorically, or maybe you answer it in the book, but I don't know how. And I guess then that stands up as, here we are, a Women's History Month, or we're recording it in Women's History Month, and people will see it right after that. But what a story! What a role model! But you'd rather people don't have to go through that, but just to understand the human spirit, the strength of the human spirit.
Absolutely.
How has it been received? How have people taken it? I mean, to me, it's life-changing. I'll never forget that, I can't wait to see the book and read the book, but I'll never forget that we've had this conversation, because you can't lose it, So what are the reactions, and who do you hope to reach, and what do you hope to make, get, what would you like to see the response be?
Oh my goodness. Well, of course, it would be nice to have a miniseries streaming, but that's pie in the sky. But I would love that.
Wow, what a tough miniseries that would be.
I hope that as much as readers read about the treatment of these women, they don't stay stuck in the barbarity of it, but get beyond it to how can we take lemons and make lemonade? We are faced with realities, and I think that's why I think this book is for everyone, because all of us, regardless of language, cultural heritage, geography, all of us face some really daunting experiences in our lives.
At different levels.
At different levels, absolutely.
No question.
I ground mine on the history of Puerto Rico in the 19th century, but I hope that we can see the humanity in all of us and the commonality of it. And I look at your reaction, and you're a 21st century white man in New York.
Yes.
And yet you are moved by this story.
Oh. Well, either you're human or you're not. I mean, what can I tell you? I'm just curious about this, because you say you see my reaction. In order to write a book, an educated and something, a scholarly work of any sort, it takes time and it takes commitment to, of course, every word. How did you get through it? In other words, was it difficult? You said, okay, now I'm going to imagine this just horror story. And then how did you get through it? I don't know how else to ask the question.
It wasn't easy, because in order for me to touch the reader, I have to go there. And so writing some of the scenes were really difficult. And at one point I ended up in a hospital because it was a tough place to be.
Wow.
But
and when you say the hospital, because you were mentally or psychologically or even physically
no,
exhausted?
What happened was I finished writing a scene that was very difficult, and I thought, oh, I did a good job. And then I got up and I started throwing up, and I didn't stop throwing up for 3 days.
Dahlma, I wish you were here. I wish we weren't virtual. I'd give you a big hug right now. If we were still in the studio, I would get up out of my chair and give you a hug.
Well, next time you see me, you can hug me.
Oh, that'll be fair enough. Okay. But that all of that underscores the title, and a woman of endurance. And as you said, let's not get lost in the barbarity, but let's get lost in the fact that here's a woman who grew up and moved on, et cetera, et cetera. Stupid question, but everybody wants to know, how long did it take you to write it?
Oh my goodness.
Because the research and putting yourself in the mind of being back there then.
Yes. The research took the most time. Probably actual writing probably took 4 or 5 years.
And I bring that up because, you know, it's after we've talked about some very deep things, you know, the simple the that fact also encapsulates how important the work is. That it's
Mhm.
not just a story you told to dash off, and now
Right.
here's the story
Oh, no.
that
No
you
dashing.
right, right. Do you in your mind have a series? I realize you want to make this a TV series, but a series of books, like you say now. Well, I've done this, and now I have that.
Mhm.
Or is this so all encompassing and takes so much time and effort and everything that you need to put into it that ultimately you just can't even think about anything else?
Well, that's a great question. Um,
We all do what we're supposed to do.
yes, and we do it well. Daughters of the Stone covered the first book, covered 5 generations, and the readers kept wanting to know, well, what happened to this one, or what happened to the other one, or what comes next.
Ah.
And so I realized that Daughters of the Stone was the foundation from which everything else will grow. And yes, it will be a series. I'm hoping to take one generation at a time. And so um, the main character in A Woman of Endurance, whose name is Pola, was introduced in Daughters of the Stone, and now she has her own book.
So we could definitely see as you take a moment to think about it, how you can extrapolate it to the next point. The last thing I want to ask you about is our home borough of the Bronx, and I always ask this question to artists and writers and photographers:
Mhm.
how does the Bronx inform your inspiration or helped you do this? And I know what I would guess, but I don't want to
Mhm.
put words in your mouth.
I see so many of my characters in the voices and the faces and the bodies of people in the Bronx. The Bronx feeds me. I hear it in their music, in the food, in the um, even in the diversity. Because in this book there is diversity, even though the action never leaves Puerto Rico. Um, I think the Bronx informs everything I do, just like Puerto Rico
Just
informs
just like just
everything.
like it just like it does me. Listen,
Mhm.
I'm gonna add one word to that, and what I see in my friends and neighbors in the Bronx is the strength. And if you
Oh,
talk about a
mhm,
woman of endurance, the strength of the
mhm,
so many, I mean, I don't have to list all the things we're last in, and you can start with health
mhm,
care and health
mhm,
numbers,
mhm.
but you know, food insecurity, homeless. I mean,
Yes,
you know, we know they, but yet here we are, and we
yes.
we have that we're men and
And
women of endurance. Listen, the
now
book.
that you say that, I have to say
Yeah,
that
you got to be quick. Go ahead.
in the Woman of Endurance revolves around a Black community, right?
Right.
That supports each other in many ways. And what you just said about the Bronx is very much the
That's who
same.
we are.
I'm thinking about the fire that we had
Got it.
lately.
We do got to run.
Okay.
Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa. The book is A Woman of Endurance. Beginning April 12th, it'll be available everywhere. You know, get into it, enjoy it,
It's
understand it.
available now. So
To Dalma, and then previously to Liz Donovan. And guess what? We're gonna see you next week. Good night.